Welcome back to the Fleeting Conversations podcast. I'm Matthew Leffler. I am coming to you live from Osage Beach in Missouri. You can see all the activity and the fun, but I am so excited to talk with you all today. I have some incredible guests. Chris Fields will be joining us from Zehl Logistics in just a little bit, but we have a lot to catch up on. It's been a minute. Before we get to all the things that we're going to be talking about, look, I have to give a special thanks to the folks who helped make this thing possible. People like my floating disembodied head right there. And you know what? Sometimes that floating disembodied head also needs a microphone. And, well, there it is, the floating disembodied head with a microphone. But more than that, I have to thank my friends at DAT, Dial a Truck. Since 1978, DAT has been helping truckers, and now more recently, last 20, 30 years, brokers find loads. How do you get from one place to another place with profitable loads? And in this market, we need all the help we can get. There's a lot of stuff going on in this world, and DAT's been a partner for truckers for almost 40 years. It's great to have them as a sponsor for our podcast, helping bring to you what I hope is educational and entertaining information. And boy, oh boy, do we have some information today. Last week, we covered the massive Supreme Court decision in Chevron. This case overturned over 40 years of Supreme Court precedent. In a nutshell, what this thing did was upend how administrative agencies interpret the statutes to give them power. How does that apply to the trucking industry? I'm glad that you asked. See, the way that our industry is regulated is by a whole bunch of different things. And Chevron has been with us all the way since almost before deregulation. So 1984 was when Chevron was decided. Things like hours of service, ELD mandates, Department of Labor classifications, all of these things have enjoyed some level of Chevron deference. What it all boils down to, and I've talked about this a few times, but I'm going to reiterate for everyone who's watching us, whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, or if you're listening to this podcast on Apple or on Spotify. The way that Chevron works is a federal government, the Congress in this case, creates a law. They create a bill that enables a federal regulatory agency. That then goes to the president, who signs it, and the agency is born. That agency has so much power. What that agency gets to do is they get to create rules, and those rules have the same power and effect of statutes that are on the books from Congress and the president signing them. If the statute is not clear, if there is ambiguity in the text, the federal agency interprets on their own what that text means. And if that text means a more expansive view of the agency, well, that's the law. Because once it goes to the district court, the federal judiciary, the judiciary has to defer to what the agency said. We call this Chevron deference, the deference given to the agency. We have seen this thing play out in so many ways, and Chevron is the most cited case in all of administrative law. This case being overturned in a 6-3 decision just a couple weeks ago will change fundamentally so many aspects of not just trucking, but literally every single federal agency that makes rules. I'll give you an example. You see, a couple years ago, OSHA was thinking, how do we create a vaccine mandate? OSHA looked at its statute, they looked at their belly button, and they said, yeah, we think we have the authority to create a rule or a law that would mandate vaccinations. And they did it. They did the law. And it went through the courts, ultimately going to the Supreme Court of the United States. And the Supreme Court, looking at this case, said, we do not believe that OSHA has this authority. If any other lower court had done this, that court would probably have been overruled. But at the Supreme Court, since 2016, our Supreme Court has not put in place the Chevron deference. So almost 8 years we haven't been following it. Well, now it's happened. And the other case I think is interesting to keep a note of and how we understand Chevron is the FTC's proposed rule or final rule banning non-competition agreements. When they first proposed the rule in January of 2023, the United States Chamber of Commerce wrote a very detailed comment. And in that comment, they said, we do not believe the FTC has the statutory authority, has the power given to them by Congress and signed by the president to do this thing. And because Chevron has now been overturned, the FTC's final rule is very unlikely to be successful because ultimately it's unclear that the FTC has the authority to walk into over 30 million individual contracts between workers and their hiring entity. So this is what's at stake when you think about Chevron. This case, I can't emphasize it enough, is probably the most important Supreme Court case in my lifetime, and very likely the most important one in yours. Now, let's talk about some other things that are going to be happening. If you're available, the Journal of Commerce Inland Distribution Conference, September 30th through October 2nd, 2024, in Chicago at the Westin. #Inland24. I will be speaking at this event live, and I really hope you're able to attend and get to meet you and talk about the law and supply chain and all of the other crazy things that are going on. This is a great event, and I hope to see many of you there. And as always, I'm so grateful for the chance to come into your homes or into your television or into your phone or your computer and help you understand some of these really interesting things about how law intersects with logistics or supply chain or anything else. You can't opt out of logistics and you can't opt out of the law. The better you understand it, the better off we are all going to be. Now, with no further ado, I am so excited for my guest today. His name is Chris Fields. I met him in person at Manifest earlier this year, but I've known Chris for a little bit. I know him from things that I've read, and I'm so excited to have him on the program talking about Zehl Logistics and his journey in the supply chain. So let me welcome him. Chris, how are you?
I'm great, Matt. I don't know what I'm more fascinated by, the Chevron case or your shirt. I mean, I love that thing. I'm getting one. I'm going to get one today. It is awesome, man. Good to see you, bud.
Good to see you too. I'm so excited. Like, my wife does all the fashion designing for me. I have no taste for anything, but she found this great linen shirt. It's got the watermelons. It's festive. And I'm glad we had a chance to think about Chevron. This case, man, it's not being covered very much in the big media. I'd say give it 2-3 weeks and it'll be everywhere. This case is going to be something we're going to be thinking about for many, many years. But before we get to the Chevron stuff, who are you and what do you do?
Sure. Yeah. Chris Fields. I am currently VP of sales at Zehl Logistics. And if you backtrack 15, 16 years ago, I originally wanted to be a weatherman, but apparently you need a specialized degree for that. So that happened. But I joined TQL in 2008. So 15, 16 years ago, I joined TQL. And I was there for a long time, still have a lot of friends there. Great company. I was one of their top brokers for years, moved into management, started their Tampa office. And so as far as knowledge on the brokerage side, I've seen and done most of it. So,
well, this is so interesting because brokering is, I mean, I look at things in much longer term, but brokering is fairly new in this business. If you go back 20 years, I think it was less than 5 or 6% of all freight was moved by brokers. Today, it's well over 20%. So what was it like in the early days when you were at TQL in the brokering space? Was it still relatively new industry, or how did you work with that?
Sure. I'll tell you my experience. So I knew nothing about it. I'll tell you what, the first time I applied, I got turned down.
Okay.
And if there's one thing you want to do to motivate me is to tell me, no, we don't want you. You can't do this.
We share that. So absolutely.
I applied the next day and I said, you're going to give me a shot. And so I was hired. I walked in and I looked around and I said, what in the world is going on here? But I was told, if you outwork everyone and if you treat people the right way, and if you're passionate about it, it's a heck of a career. And that's what I did, Matt. I made more phone calls. I said more bad things on the phone. When I say bad things, like I didn't know what I was talking about. I was like, that's wrong. And I learned from it. And I became very, very good at it. But the other thing that stood out to me was in that atmosphere, it was like, hey, we have to get customers, we have to get clients. And I said, well, there's another relationship here that's just as important, and that's the carrier relationship. So I was very, very big on working the right way with my carriers, paying attention, paying them fairly, treating them the right way. So when the market did tighten up, guess who they would work with when they wouldn't work with others. So
I mean, it's so interesting. So when you're brokering, you have, like you mentioned, you have two different relationships you have to manage. You have the shipper, who's your customer, and then you have the capacity, the motor carriers, and that's kind of thing that you're selling against. So did you start off on the shipper side? Did you start off on the motor carrier side? Where did you really cut your teeth initially?
So their model is all in one. So I was trying to build a book of business, and I was a top 5 broker there back in my first few years.
Wow.
I just made more calls. And when I say more calls, Matt, I'm not joking. We would go into the training room, and they would put all the call counts up there, like a lot of the places do. It's a competition. And it was like Chris Fields, 1,200 calls this week. Second place, 600 calls this week. And I said, well, I'm either going to give this all I got and own it and figure it out, or I'm going to go do something else. And lo and behold, if you do something enough, then you get pretty dang good at it. So that's what I did.
Well, TQL is one of the largest brokers in the United States. I think it's top 2. How big was it when you started? How big did it get when you left?
I don't remember the exact sales number that they were at, but I know most recent numbers I saw, they were an $8 billion company with 10,000 plus employees. I think I was employee right around number 900 or so back in 2000, but they started in 97, 98. Yeah.
It's just crazy to think of how this industry transformed after deregulation in 1980. Do you think about those times? Like, do you have anyone in your family who is in supply chain? Like, why would you even come to this bonkers business in the first place?
I don't know. I was valeting cars in Cincinnati, and that's where their headquarters is. And they were hiring, and I applied. And I think what hooked me was them telling me no, that I couldn't do it. They said, this isn't for everyone. And I said, well, watch this. And fast forward 15 years later, I started their Tampa office. I worked with their largest enterprise accounts. I mean, it's a great company, and I learned so much from them on how to do things. But that's when I said, you know what, there's another opportunity here with Zehl. And so about a year, 14 months ago, I came to join this team.
Let's talk about it. So what does Zehl do? Are you helping brokers, or what is the sweet spot that Zehl Logistics occupies today?
Yeah, so we're in the remote staffing space. We don't move any freight. I'm over that for the time being. I'm done with brokering freight. But what we do and what we saw is there are others in our space, in the remote staffing space, where they work with US-based logistics companies, and they leverage the talent that they have in Colombia or Latin America or Philippines, because there's a lot of savings there, and you can let your domestic employees do what they do best. But I saw the opportunity, and because of our founder being from Eastern Europe, I said, well, I know carriers from Eastern Europe that are really good. If we have offices in Eastern Europe and leverage that talent with the US-based companies, and you combine the experience that I have and the rest of the leadership team has, no one is doing that. And it has just resonated with clients. I mean, there's nothing against, saying, hey, we have bodies in South America or Philippines for data entry, but we add an extra layer. It's wait a minute, Chris did what for how long? He built teams, and I get to speak to him and use talent from Eastern Europe. It packs a punch.
Well, I was talking to Jeff Ogren a couple of days ago over at Zehl, and it's interesting. I part of my family's background is from Serbia, and there's very few cultures that fight and hustle as hard as the Serbs. There's not much you can say. And I had mechanics in my facilities in Chicago when I had mobile mechanics and shops from Poland. So these people, the work ethic that they have, the desire to compete is absolutely there. What I love about when I met you at Manifest, one of the things that really resonated with me about Zehl specifically was how you're kind of a consultative partner for the brokerages you work with. Like, understanding the risks and liabilities of brokering is substantial, And having the ability to go offshore certain activities can not only reduce costs, which is important, but also like de-risk the business. Like, is that something that kind of attracted you to Zehl? Like, what was the value you saw in Zehl that made you want to come work there after being at TQL for such a long time?
Yeah, you're spot on, especially with a lot of the wage and hour regulations coming into place. You can offshore a lot of that. But you're right. We get to go in there, peek under the hood, and I'm able to say, and the team's able to say, well, we suggest trying this for after hours, or have you thought about this? And I've gotten so granular with it, Matt. I've seen a few load coverage teams that we built. We have them specifically covering Midwest freight. Their call counts are higher, the effort's there, their margins are better. It's because they're speaking Polish to Polish carriers. They're from that region. The relationship is there, and it's just this team. I mean, we're different. You know that. You've met me enough. We do things a little different. So
there's some great. I think I'll toss up Casey's comment here. Absolutely. What I think about when you touch on the wage and hour, it's kind of how I first got to know you, as reading through documents and seeing some of the stories. And I'll put this up there for the folks who are listening at home, who may be freight brokers and thinking about this stuff. We saw last year one of the largest liability verdicts against your former employer as it relates to misclassifying entry-level workers. And when you misclassify, and this is happening all throughout the transportation space, all brokerages are following some model kind of like this. And it is so interesting when you see the types of liabilities possible, which is going to drive or accelerate offshoring or automation. How do you look at automation in the space today?
I think, and I've got a good opinion on this, Matt. I think there is a place for automation. There's a place for offshoring. And then that makes your domestic A players even stronger. If one of the biggest frustrations that I had an office of 200 plus people in Tampa, some really great brokers who did things the right way, but I would go in the morning and they might be making check calls or giving out comm checks or doing something that wasn't revenue driving, and it frustrated the heck out of me. I said, let's take all that off your plate so that you can run, so that you can focus on the customer relationship. It's going to drive revenue. But you can't just take it off their plate and trust that it's going to be done. And that's where at Zehl, everyone that we have, our staff, we got 800 or so staff over in Europe across 7 offices. They all come from the industry. You don't need to tell them what a van load is, what a reefer load is. And Matt, I've sat in on some of the interviews with the staff, and after hiring for years here in the U.S., I am very, very impressed with what I've seen, unfortunately.
Well, you hit the ground running. I mean, these are people that have been doing this for a period of time. They understand the business. They know the language. That's a learning curve you can't overcompensate for. Now, you're not just doing brokers, though. You're doing like software developers, too. What is the types of solutions that Zehl has for folks?
Yes. I like to say that we're going a mile deep and kind of an inch wide on things. We're primarily 3 countries, and for the most part, 3 roles. A lot of back office, a lot of accounting, and then on the tech side, we've had some brokerages come to us and say, could we leverage the Eastern European tech talent because it is strong. And I don't know much about hiring tech developers here in the US, but my wife used to do it, and she said it was extremely expensive to do so. So if you can leverage
it is. Absolutely
Eastern Europe, yeah.
That's fantastic. So now with Zehl, how long has the company been in business at this point?
So the company's been around for about 6 years.
Okay.
But about 13, 14 months ago, we really started to pour some fuel on the logistics side of it. They were behind, Zehl itself was behind a large logistics company here, Millhouse Logistics, that our founder started. He leveraged that talent, had a great exit with Millhouse, and then said, well, what if we replicate that model? I bet there are others in the US that would like to leverage that Eastern European talent while everyone else is targeting, Latin America, Philippines, those kind of things. And that's what we're doing. And man, I'd never get tired of hearing from our clients when they say, wait a minute, you've done this before. We're interested in working with you and hearing what your thoughts are on it. So it's a great time.
If you have the expertise, that's what people come for. They want to understand that you've been there before. You've done this in the past. You have the capabilities. And it seems to be that if you're in the space today, you've done this on the brokering side for a long time. Now you know what the best in the world do. And you can bring that resource to those folks. I'm kind of curious. I was talking to Dave Broing from NFI not too long ago, and we were discussing broker margins. Like, how much does a brokerage in this day and age can they reasonably make? And I think as time goes on, it's not going to be 30%. It's not going to be 20%. It's probably going to be that spot between maybe 10 and 15. And if you're operating with that kind of a ratio, you have to find ways to control cost. And just like trucking, the brokerage space has similar types of constraints when it comes to how expensive it is. So trucking, it's the biggest thing is fuel, labor, assets, maintenance, tires, and insurance fight for those stuff. So labor is always this thing we're trying to solve for. This seems to be one of the ways you can help a brokerage solve this issue of how do I control spend. Is that a fair assessment?
It is. And like I said, I spent years hiring and it was frustrating. Or maybe I was just not good at hiring. I don't know. But turnover was high. And it's because we were hiring straight out of college, no industry experience. And, 6-7 months into it, they said, this is tough. I want to go do something else.
That's right. More meat for the grind.
Money. Yeah. Yeah. And then you spend money retraining someone and paying your recruiters. So if you can get someone that knows what they're doing, that looks at it as more of a career, which is what our folks do. I mean, our turnover is 8% right now, post-placement.
Wow. It's
amazing. But I was over they would start, and then I got to hear every single story. Girlfriend broke up with me. Dog is sick. Got to go home. And come on, we're here to work. We're here to build something big. And that's what I see in what we have right now and what we're doing. And it's resonating with our clients. So excited to see where we take it, man.
I'm so excited to see how this grows. I think this space, like in light of some of the legal framework we've seen over the last couple of years, and just the need for finding diversified ways to find labor, this thing about COVID with remote work, it didn't invent remote work. That had always been around, but right. It was the great accelerator of people saying, okay, we can do a lot more with our existing resources all across the globe. So this is interesting. But what you do a lot of posting on social media. I saw a post you did a couple of days ago about this deal between RXO and Coyote. And I look at it and go, oh man, UPS is losing $800 million selling this thing to RXO. What do you think about the world of consolidation and sales? Like, what is happening in your industry?
That's what's going to happen. There's going to be more consolidation. I know everyone's saying it, but I think two things. I think there's going to be more consolidation in the big players. Think about the grocery stores. I mean, there's Kroger, there's Publix, there's Albertsons, couple, but there's going to be some consolidation just like that. And I think the push towards the agency model is going to be very prevalent. It's going to be folks that have experience that say, hey, you know what? I do want some free time and I want to still have my book of business. So I think we see a rise on the agency side.
We did that with motor carriers. We said, hey, look, you're going to be an independent operator. You're going to be an owner operator. You're going to be a business owner, and you'll take on the risk of all of the maintenance and the compliance and the fuel. And we'll take the risk of the margin. We'll have all that and you have everything else. I totally see that. We talked before we went live a little bit. My father's business, he started back in 91, was an outsourcing company. We were called Outsource Fleet Services because Dad was very literal in the naming of the business. And we were a vendor, maintenance provider for a company called RPS, Roadway Package System. And RPS became FedEx Ground. So for 25 years, we were one of the largest maintenance providers. And the idea is focusing on your core competency. When you can, you outsource what is possible if you can get the level of control and quality and consistency that you'd have with your own folks. But to your point on the agency model, it makes total sense. Like, how do I de-risk my business? Oh, I'll have someone become a business owner and we'll have an arm length transaction. Everyone's going to be happy. What other trends are you seeing in the business that get you excited?
Well, don't think of this as we're taking away from American jobs. What I encourage is when you take those tasks off your domestic employees' plate, use those savings to invest in a more higher paying American job. Maybe another salesperson or maybe more assets. That's the play. That's how you're really going to run. And I think we're gonna start seeing that lean model even more, where there's just a sales team, there's some AI sprinkled in, and then there's some outsourced remote staff that are even better than a lot of the domestic talent.
Do you
Out
see a
there.
world when the robots can do just as good as humans? Do you see that world in the near future? Is that still a long, long time away?
No, and I talked to Jeff about this yesterday. We were talking about it. How does AI have a role? Absolutely. But I think the opposite. I think this push for AI is going to make people who can talk to humans even more valuable because no one's doing it. Everybody's
Yeah, that's right.
texting each other. Everyone's emailing each other. So if I get a salesperson who can get on the phone and have an actual conversation, that is gold. And I think
Absolutely.
we're going to see that separation.
I'm very curious to see, like, for me, I look at like autonomous trucks. They're getting closer and closer. We're seeing relay points open up, whether they're at the travel centers or companies like Outpost, or I assume at some point Truck Parking Club will have some level of these things. And you start asking these really interesting questions of, when you automate parts of the supply chain, where else do you find these spots where there's leaks or things you can plug? And the brokering business remains this very physical, labor intensive business, like making phone calls. We have trucker tools or Project 44 or Four Kites that can give you visibility or text locate. But ultimately, there's a human element that you can't remove. On the mechanical side, you can't get rid of the mechanics. They have to be there with the asset. But you can still offshore these things that require human intervention, but they can be done anywhere in the world. And that seems to give the flexibility I'd imagine that your clients are seeing working with Zehl.
Yes, they are. And we encourage, everyone out there probably understands there's a BPO model, or business process outsourcing. And that's not what we do. That's more of a, hey, Chris, we need this done and we don't want to deal with it. Take it off our plate, go do it. But in our model, we need this off our plate, but we still want to have them as part of the team. There's still a lot of interaction, not necessarily hand holding, but still they're a part of the team. And when you do that, and then you start to look at your bottom line and say, wait a minute, we're saving how much doing this? And they're better. I mean, that's value. So I think we've been able, and I've already seen the data. We've had clients who said, you know what, you're right. I'll try 1, 2 people. Fast forward 3, 4 months, they go, we need 5, 6, 7 more. And we are optimizing our domestic team. So, it gets me excited, man.
Do you see other areas you could add value to your customers? Like, do you see a world of other types of positions that you would be able to help them with? I think this is more futuristic, but in the world of autonomous level 4 trucks, let's say, there's these things called remote operators. And the question about where will these remote operators be located? What kind of training will they have? What other places do you see Zehl expanding over the next few years?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier is we're really a mile deep on these things, because if I were to go and pitch what you were talking about, I didn't do that for 15 years. And that's the value we're bringing. But now, could it be done? Absolutely. We have had clients come to us with some roles that I said, what in the world is that? And then our recruiters come back and go, we have people that can do it. I was like, well, you guys have at it. I deal with the logistics side. So you're right. You're not wrong. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you see things like AB5 and other regulations push for more offshore? Like, do you see the regulatory framework as a business catalyst for you, or is it just another thing you have to deal with as you guys go to educate your customers about the value you bring to them and how you can help them hedge against risk?
That was the opportunity that I saw. Is this, unlike a brokerage or a typical, carrier here in the U.S., we're very insulated from outside factors, whether that's, the market changing, because if all of a sudden the market tightens up, then our clients will say, I need more people. And if the market is loose as it is now, and I'd hope that changes here soon for everyone, then they'll say, hey, we have to cut costs somewhere. And this is a great option. Or maybe a regulation comes in. So we're very insulated from it, and there's value regardless of outside influence, I guess is the best way to say it.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, ultimately the freight market is likely not to improve significantly until Q1 or Q2 of next year. That seems to be the current thinking. That could change. Obviously, we could have some crazy black swan event, or we could have some major carriers or brokers disappear. But I do think that you kind of outlined this. Like I look at Zehl and I go, this is not a nice to have. This is a must have. If you're a brokerage and you're trying to be competitive in this market, there is no operating margin. Like there is no additional margin to unlock. The only thing you can do right now is control your cost. For trucking companies, you can drive a little bit slower. That might save you some money on fuel and maintenance and tires and all of this. But if you're a broker and you are really focused on your clients and your customers, there's things you can do that would help reduce their cost by making your own business leaner. And that's why I think what you guys are doing makes a ton of sense, especially with jumping into doing some technology aspects of software development, because everybody needs access to technology or integration partners. And it seems that you guys have hit the nail on the head in terms of delivering value to the customers that you have.
Yeah. And I think there are a lot of other costs that I was not familiar with because I was building teams or brokering freight or whatever it may be. But those costs, benefits, the hiring and firing, the HR associated with the salary you're paying, that all comes off your plate. So whereas you may be paying 40, 45, 50,000 for someone, what's the true cost of that individual? And you're taking that as, since we're the employer of record, kind of off the plate. And I am still excited about the brokerage side of things, the logistics space in itself. And if I do get excited when the clients say we are gaining volume right now because of this, we're operating better, our processes are better, and we're kind of behind it. So really exciting stuff.
All right, so let's jump away from the logistics world for a moment. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's going on. It's an interesting space. We've all found ourselves in this. At what point in your career did you realize that you were never going to escape logistics? Like how long did it take for you to go, oh, I can't leave this industry? Did that dawn on you, or is that something you're still reckoning with?
Man, and this may sound crazy. This is okay to say. I realize I'm not a manager or a leader. I am good at just running at a sales role. And so when I was kind of cornered into that role, I said, well, I got to do something else to get where I'm comfortable, what I'm really good at. And so I knew the folks here at Zehl. And so I came over here and I said, well, with your industry knowledge, then we can't be stopped. And so I came over here, but maybe I will at some point. I told you, I'll probably still be a weatherman at some point. If you want to start a company weather channel with me, we can do it, whatever we need to do.
I am looking for a chief meteorologist for the podcast. So I think we could orchestrate something. One of my neighbors when I was in law school was a guy named David Young. He was the chief meteorologist for a CBS affiliate. So I have a deep respect for being able to be wrong all of the time and still 100% respected as a subject matter expert. So I think there's still a path. Did you go to school for meteorology? What did you go to school to do?
No, communications, University of Cincinnati. But let me tell you this. The reason I'm so fascinated by the weather side is every morning. Well, first of all, so many people watch it. What's it going to be like today? What am I going to wear? But every weather person is the same. They stand there and they go, got a 30% chance of rain, 40% chance of rain. I want to flip it around and say, no, it's a 70% chance of sun. Today's going to be great. Here's what we're
going to do. A positive spin. But the positivity doesn't sell, Chris. It's doom and gloom. That's what people crave. They want to be upset.
It doesn't sell, but I'll tell you what it will do. You'll have a better day because of it. Like, you know what? He said it's going to be 70% chance of sun. Let's go do this.
That's fantastic. Okay, what other jobs did you do? Did you ever do retail? Did you ever do any service work?
Well, this came across when I was hiring too. So I was during college, valet, bartending, hospitality, those kind of things. And I think there's just a hustle about it. Yeah. And I would say that of the thousands that I interviewed over the years, if they ever worked in a restaurant, in valet, bartending, whatever it may be, they were more than likely to be successful because they didn't like to be told no, and they hustled. So, if I ever went to those people, I would give them my business card and say, hey, come in and chat.
I loved anybody who had sports in their background, or if they did retail, because retail is like, it's tough to call motor carriers. It's tough to call shippers and try to get access to their business. It's a totally different environment if you're trying to peddle Tickle Me Elmos at 4 a.m. at KB Toys, and everybody out there is already angry at you just because they know there's not enough inventory. So I look at that like those are the types of like, oh, you can survive in this because this industry requires a very thick skin because it is a very brutal business.
Yes, but go a level deeper on the sports. Think of tennis, golf, or those individuals
Yes,
who they
absolutely.
don't have a team. Or those are the ones that really stood out to me over the years that became some of the more successful
I
players
was
that
a
I had.
sprinter,
So,
man. I
of
loved
course,
give me a 100-meter dash, a 200-meter dash, a 400-meter dash. I'm feeling very, very good. Team sports, I like them, but I really like when the success or the failure is dependent upon one variable, me. That's what I loved. I loved having that opportunity because when the pressure was the worst, that's when you do your best. That's what I loved. I love that. No one wanted to
you,
watch the men running ovals. I understand that. That's why they cut the program at Western Michigan that I was running at. But still, it was a good experience.
well, think of those guys like Roger Federer, Tiger Woods. I think even MJ and Kobe, even though they were on a team before the game started, and Tim Grover talked about this in his book Relentless. They were on the bench, head down, focused. They were about winning the game and not about this hype atmosphere. It's we've got a job to do here. And so, if you're out there and you're hiring right now, look for that in individuals. What resiliency was a
That's
big
right.
thing for me. Like, what have you overcome in your life? What is your back against the wall? Why do you have to succeed? Start asking those kind of questions. You're going to uncover and peel back some layers of some really, really good candidates that you might have not known.
And I've always found some of the most effective people are those who are not unfamiliar with failure because the sales
Mm-hmm.
business generally is a story of repeated failure with the occasional bit of great news, we got it. But that piece of the losing and how most people just can't deal with anything like that. I've lost so many things in my career that it becomes it's okay. I can deal with it. But that's another aspect to those professional athletes when they are hard on themselves when they're not successful, but they are accustomed to be able to wipe it off, sit up, and get back to the game. And that's what's so impressive about a lot of the athletes I've seen who've come out and become phenomenal salespeople.
Sure. And an interesting thing happens when you have the really good ones. You put them together if you're sitting on a sales floor. And then if someone comes along, you'll know the bad apples and they're out for whatever reasons. But if there's someone you're unsure of, go sit them next to those other people. Watch what happens. They'll rise up
That's right.
or they'll get kicked out of the pack. And this isn't a plug. We sent you one, but I put that in the Zehl Times.
I love that. I was going to ask about that next. Like, whose idea was it to do this?
Matt, I told you we were different. Everybody was doing, all these shows and everything. And I talked to Jeff and I said, what's no one doing? And I said, does anyone read a newspaper anymore? I was a paper boy when I was growing up. I said, the feel of holding the paper, the smell of the ink, all those things, reading the comics. I said, no one's doing it. It's fantastic. I mean, we got comics in here. It's unbelievable. We'll probably do another one. We'll sell it for a nickel a piece and pass them out to everyone, but it's just different, man. And it had an impact. So I thought it was fun.
I am excited for when the next issue comes out. I'd love to write an op-ed for you. So just let me know what my word count is, and I will do my best to put something together that is
You got it.
productive and compelling. Well, I think your point is well taken. Like I remember, my dad is a roadway guy back in '76. Like this industry is his life. That is his identity, is the safely delivering freight on time and undamaged across the country. And in every office he's ever had, you'll see on the coffee table in the entryway a copy of Transport Topics, a piece of paper you can look at and touch and feel and go, this is what it's about. And that's kind of going away. It's all digital. It's all this and that. And you guys did something that was truly different. And I remember how excited my kids were of the bottle that it came in. They're like, I want it. Like, no, it's on display. You leave it alone. But they all wanted it. So you guys did something really special. How many did you make in the first run?
Oh, goodness. I think over 500.
That's
and
incredible.
I sat in this office right here, hand rolled those things. You talk about the ink on my hands at the end of the day. Hand wrote the labels, but I think that's what it is, man. Is do something radical, do something unreasonable, go over the top, and add value. And if you're passionate about it, then it's going to show. Or if you just kind of you just wing it, it really doesn't hit home. So that's what we did, and we'll see where it goes. But it was great, and
The
we'll
thing is,
probably
like,
do it again.
you can't teach passion. Like, that's when you
Right.
discover. You can try to get somebody who's, demotivated and get them aligned a little bit more, but to get someone who truly loves this industry or what they do, it's hard. And everything is a commodity at some level. So what you can do to differentiate yourself is what everyone tries to strive for. And I think for that first iteration, that is amazing. It is amazing. I remember at Manifest, you guys had your own podcast booth. Like, you are absolutely positioning yourselves to be in the top echelon of the companies in the space you occupy, but you're doing things differently. And that's what I think is so interesting. That's why I was so excited to talk with you, because clearly you know how to communicate. And it's about finding new ways to get in front of that customer or those prospects to understand, how can I help add value to your business?
You know what else though? It's authenticity. Guys like you that are passionate about it's authentic. You're not going in Chat GPT and making a post on LinkedIn. You're saying, this is what I'm passionate about, and this is my words on the subject. And man, that hits home, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on an email, whether it's on a phone call. It shows. And when you find those are diamonds in the rough, man. So kudos to you. We're a lot alike in that sense, but that's where it's at. Find what you're passionate about.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. We probably have more parallels than we think, because I was a lawyer. I still am a lawyer. I still practice law, but I was with my father's company for 6 years. And when we sold the business, he retired with a 5-year non-compete, and I joined the new company as a VP of sales. And I did my sales stuff. I did a very successful job, but eventually, I want to do something different. And I had a non-competition agreement. So I had to leave. I was legally prohibited from fixing commercial vehicles for money. And I went into software because I was a place I could circumvent the non-compete and still stay relevant. And what I learned during this time period was, as Americans, we tie what we do and our identity as the same thing. And I realized, if you have a non-compete and you can't do what you've been trained to do, you lose a part of yourself. You don't know until it's gone. Then you're like, oh, I'm not that thing anymore. And so making the podcast and doing these things that I do was one of the ways I could say, this is mine. This is who I am. And for better or for worse, it is what it is. And I think your point on authenticity is really well taken. I like to think of the most important things for an effective salesperson to be ABC. The first is, you have to be authentic. You have to be authentic. If you're not authentic, someone can tell that a mile away and say, I know that you really don't care about this. Then you got to be brief, brevity. I love being as concise as I can within reason. And then finally, candor, being truthful with your audience or with your prospects about what you can and can't do. Because the last thing you need is to say you can do something and then not do it. So authenticity, brevity, candor, those are the ingredients that I've found the most effective, at least for me. And I imagine it's probably the case for a lot of folks.
You bring up a great point on the non-compete side. And everyone thinks, well, what about the individuals who leave? They're under non-compete. They can't do anything. They have to sit on their hands. Sure, there's a place for non-competes. Is it needed for a college graduate who knows nothing about logistics and they want to go do something after? Maybe not. Not my decision to make. Yeah. But there are an equal amount of individuals who are still working at places that are fearful of that. Absolutely. That can't go and run and do what they want to do. And I fell into that. I said, I'll be 43 years old this weekend. And I said, I am still ready to run. I don't know for how much longer till I go do weather, but I'm still ready to go to run. And it was, it was fortunate that I have the connections I do at Zehl and that we're not involved in that space. But I think about the others out there who still have that desire to run, and maybe they can. So, but I think that Chevron, like you were saying, is going to hurt the FTC side of things.
This is something we're very much aligned with. 30 million Americans, 1 in 5 working Americans have a non-compete. Now, maybe the employer doesn't enforce them. Maybe they do. At the end of the day, you have the contract. Most people are either they don't understand it or they're terrified of what happens if they leave. And the same thing is, you can't go and restart your career all the time. Our net worth is our network. And you have built up a network of people, carriers and customers and people in supply chain for 20 years or longer. And that gives you the ability to have more mobility. Most people don't have that mobility. That's why I'm such an advocate against non-competes. I know that they have a place. There's a very good place for selling a business or being a C-suite, but to be entry level, making $20 an hour, $30 an hour with a non-compete, it baffles me, but that's the world we live in.
It is. Yeah. And it happens a lot. I experienced that. I know we've talked about it in the past. I was involved in a lot of the, the wage and hour side and the non-compete things there, but it's unfortunate. I hope it changes, but it's the world we live in. What are we going to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's the sad thing for the folks who are listening, because I heard a lot of people who reached out to me about the FTC rule. There's almost no chance this thing survives. It's enjoined right now in federal court in Texas. It'll go eventually to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They'll also say that FTC lacks authority. And if it does, by some miraculous event, get to the Supreme Court, our Supreme Court, as it sits right now, would absolutely destroy that rule. There's just no way. So the best you can do outside of an act of Congress, which they certainly could do if they so desired, is just don't sign them. Don't work for companies that use them. Don't do business with companies that use non-competes. But end of the day, it's just the nature of what it's like working in America. It is
now this is your side of the business. Aren't there states that have said moving forward, it's not retroactive, but moving forward, like Minnesota, for example, or California, don't they have those in place where you're not allowed to enforce it? Or
yeah, so there are states that absolutely ban non-competes outright, except for sales of business. In my state, Illinois, what we do is you must give someone 14 days to review it, and they have to be over a certain salary. If they're under a threshold for salary, they're just not enforceable. So this is the piece I think people kind of get mistaken with, thinking non-competes are only for executives. They're like Jimmy John's had non-competes for their drivers. Like everyone does wonky things. Because to your other point about retention, if you can't retain people and you're like, how can I make people stay with my company? I can either make the company better to work for, better benefits, more other things that make people happy, or I can drive fear into their hearts that I might sue them if they leave me. And that's what a lot of companies went with. They went with this model of going after non-competes as a way to drive retention. And I think that's a dumb decision, but that's what some leaders have opted to do.
But us as Americans, we are resilient and we will evolve from it. Like we were talking about earlier, we will find ways to optimize using technology or outsourcing or whatever it may be. So I'm optimistic about our industry. And I know that the cream will rise to the top. The brokers who are out there that treat people the right way, who have a good carrier network, those kind of things, they're gonna rise. And this market will turn. I've seen it for too long. This one is extended, but also what I'll say is everyone who's complaining about it right now, they're not talking about how good it was for that 2 or 3 years.
Well, that's the thing. I think I call them tourists. We got a lot of tourism come into supply chain in like 2020, 2021. Like, oh, this is amazing. There's so much money. It's $8 a mile. It's like, listen, understand that the biggest motor carriers in the world, I mean, most of them are gone now. CF is gone, Yellow's gone, Roadway's gone, but those companies survived for nearly 100 years in some cases. And they did that because freight is cyclical. It is up and down. It's feast or famine. The best motor carriers shut off capacity and then they bring it back when the market changes. And this is how it's always been. This recession, though, after talking to Jason Miller from Michigan State, this is probably the most prolonged freight recession since 2008. So it's for a lot of folks who have entered this, they've never seen it this bad. They've never seen it this bad. Trust me, it can always get worse. It can always get worse, but it's probably not going to get much worse. It's just going to be a few more months before things hopefully get better.
Yeah, I think so. It'd be interesting to see. I've heard talks of a freight index for market rates, for example. You remember years ago, they talked about Southwest Airlines had locked in fuel prices at a certain number. And when they skyrocketed, that's what made them so profitable. And I'm wondering, is there an angle on the freight side to do those things? I know there's the RFPs and contracts, but those are never usually held up when something crazy happens. So I think there's something there. I'm not smart enough to figure it out.
Well, the thing that there are parts of this industry that deeply bother me. And one of the parts that bothers me so much is how we maintain commercial vehicles. So we have International Road Check. We have Brake Safety Week. If you look at the data in aggregate over the last, let's say, decade, it's about 20% of all the vehicles on the road that get inspected are unsafe at any speed. There are unsafe at any speed. And you have to ask yourself, like, if we know what the cost of a truck is per hour, and we know how much the freight is paying them, and we see that the delta is they can't actually maintain their vehicles at that level, what should we think about that as a society? Like, knowing that part of the feature of this supply chain is vehicles that are unsafe. I don't know how you resolve that. I just don't. But at some point, as an industry, we have to figure that out, I would think, right?
Yeah, I would think so. You need to be a broker. If you said that to shippers, like, I mean, they're going to be fascinated. Well, you're kind of right. Okay, we'll pay. Maybe not, but.
Well, actually, I'll mention even further about the shipper side of things. So shippers I've seen have become increasingly interested in operating their own kind of freight brokerage kind of internally. And I often tell them, like, do you have any idea the liability you're walking into? And they go, what do you mean? As brokers, we're not liable for the actions of the motor carrier. No, it depends. In some areas of the country, if your motor carrier makes a mistake and they sue you too, you might not be held liable. In some aspects of the country, if you are acting as a broker and you get sued, you could be found responsible. And the Supreme Court has twice now punted on this. So there's the Global Trans case VE, which is in the Seventh Circuit, which held brokers cannot be liable for the actions of the motor carrier. And then there's a C.H. Robinson case out in California, and they could be found liable. So I think your conversations with not just with brokers, but also with shippers who want to play into the world of being their own broker, there's a lot of liability and risk they need to understand before they think, I can just save money by cutting out the intermediary. They don't offer any value. It'll be interesting to see if shippers start understanding the liability in front of them.
Tell me this, you'll probably have an answer. So when it comes in terms, all the talk about theft recently, cargo theft, this and that, how much liability is held on a broker in terms of if the shipper says, okay, it's yours, if something happens to it, you're responsible. What's the law around that?
It depends. We had a case in the 11th Circuit. There was a broker who did not follow the right processes. The freight got stolen. The shipper sued the broker and said, "You're the one who got us this driver who wasn't the right person," and they were found not to be liable. It was the same F4A preemption. So brokers do service, route, and price. Like, that's the thing that they do. Safety and theft is kind of ancillary, but to answer your question, it depends on the state you're operating. You could actually be the same set of facts in California or in Illinois and have absolutely different outcomes. So the thing people need to think about when it comes to theft and freight and fraud generally, this happens in bad markets and in good markets, but bad markets a lot. Mm-hmm. You have to know who you do business with. You can't rely on what the FMCSA tells you. You can't rely on all the different software products that are out there. You have to make phone calls and talk with them and get references if it's that important to you. But if you're just shooting for the lowest price, this is what happens. So that's the answer. It's a terrible answer, Chris, but if you want to be a lawyer, almost every answer will always be it depends, because it always depends.
Hey, I've been in enough of the deposition side. I got very good at saying it depends. So, and I asked you that question, Matt. I just, funny quick story. I used to, in my last few years, I would travel with brokers and go visit some of our largest accounts. And we traveled out to this customer who was shipping some high value goods. And oftentimes I will not know the broker that I'm traveling with. So I'm getting, kind of cliff notes on the relationship, what we're doing. So I remember walking in, and I would always do this. I'd say, hey, it's going to be executive team in a conference room. Is there anything that I need to know that could come up? Any landmines? It's like, no, everything's great. We're killing it. I was like, all right, let's do this. So I walk in there, I get up and present to their executive team 3, 4, 5 minutes. And I really hammer home security of load security, all these things. I was like, all right, I nailed that. Man, I was so confident when I was walking back to my seat, and she goes, I'll never forget her name, Lynn. She goes, sit down, Chris. She said, you just stood up there for 5 minutes and talked about security, and we had a load stolen 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
And I said, I looked over at the broker. I said, you could have told me that, bud. You could have told me. Like, it happens. Like, don't get me wrong. It does happen. Just let me know. So,
Bad news can't wait. That's one of the most things I've always been a big proponent of is if there's bad news, don't wait. Like don't wait for me to discover it. Let's just talk about that right now so I know going in. And I will say this on the freight brokering, fraud, and theft side of things. We on the supply chain see this as a really big issue, and it is a big issue. It is nothing compared to the shrink that retailers endure every year. So the theft of goods from the retailer is like $1 trillion. It's a massive amount. It pales in comparison when you look at freight theft and fraud. But for our industry, we see it every day, so we think about it a lot. Chris, are there any final things you want us to leave you with before I let you go today?
Matt, it's always great to talk to you. I think this has been a great conversation. People know where to find me on LinkedIn, very active on there, and would love to chat about your business. And if nothing else, just connect. I'm having a blast over here, and we're gonna take this thing to the next level. So
well,
good to talk to you, bud.
I'll make sure to put your LinkedIn into the show notes. And again, it's a pleasure to have you. If you can't stick around for a second, I'm going to say a quick little outro, and then I'll chat with you in just a moment. So there you go, everybody. We have done it. We have gone through and done a live show here in beautiful Osage Beach. Thank you for joining us. Look, this supply chain isn't mine. It's not Chris's. It's your supply chain. If you see things happening that you want to change, you have the power to change it. I am so grateful for the opportunity to sit here today and talk with you about the ways that freight is moving, ways that you as a broker can find additional ways to reduce your costs with partners like Zehl Logistics. Always thank you to my friends at DAT, Dial a Truck. I am so grateful for their partnership with me to help me to produce these things and to do deep dives in the law and supply chain, because at the end of the day, you are better off if you understand how this system works. It's not meant to be easy understood for non-lawyers. That's why I take such pleasure in breaking these things down. And of course, to my floating disembodied head, ask for it by name. As always, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to catching you on the next one of our very fleeting conversations. Take care.